one of the most fundamental decisions for implementing an operations strategy is how you arrange the different activities in a process. It's what we call process choice. It's determining what kind of configuration the different activities are going to be in, whether they're going to be working exclusively on a product, whether they're going to be shared activities, and we call this element of operations strategy the process choice element. You should recognize that this is a long-term decision. Very rarely are you going to be able to change the configuration of the activities very often. It's going to be expensive for you to change how you have situated your different machines, whether it's in a manufacturing plant or whether it's in a fast food restaurant. It is going to be time consuming, and it's going to require a lot of investment to be able to set it up in certain ways. So let's start off with taking a look at two very basic types of process arrangements. One of them is a linear arrangement, and one of them is what we're going to call a jumbled. So we're not going to get into the definitions of the formal process types that we see in operations strategy, but we're simply going to call them linear and jumbled at this point. So let's take a look at these basic types of process types. Right. So let's take an example here. I want you to think of a health clinic in which you have kids that go through the health clinic, they get treatment, as well as you have adults. So here is an example of a linear arrangement for that health clinic. So you have children that go through the whole process. They go through the activities like check-in, they have to wait, they get seen by a nurse, they get seen by a doctor, they may have to go get labs, get an x-ray, get some treats before they leave, and then they exit out. So that's going to be the arrangement for children. And for adults, it's going to be a similar arrangement, except it's going to be maybe a different sequence, maybe a different set of activities. So what you have here, the basic difference between this and the next arrangement we're going to see is that you have a dedicated set of activities. The play area that we have here is dedicated for kids. The weight room for adults has a television in it, which you don't have for the kids. So that's the main difference between this and the next arrangement that we're going to look at, is that each of these activities is dedicated to that particular type of customer that is going to go through it. And in this case, it's patients being kids and adults. Now let's take a look at the other kind of arrangement to make a contrast between a linear and a jumbled arrangement. So in a jumbled arrangement, you're not going to have these activities being exclusively used for a certain type of customer. So what you have here is a set of activities that are placed in sort of departments. There is a wait department where people can wait, whether it's customers who are kids, whether it's customers who are adults, and you can even add customers, patients who are going for geriatrics, so the older patients. It's a common wait area in this case. It's a common area of being seen by nurses and doctors. So these are all common areas. And what I've depicted over here, what you see over here, is that the process flows for kids are depicted by the solid line, while the process flow for the adults is depicted by the dotted line. So the kids go to the wait, to the nurse, to the doctors, while the adults have to go to the wait, and from there they have to go first get their labs done before they go through the rest of the activities in the process. So two things here. One, the activities are being shared across two different types of customers in this case, could be shared among many different types of customers otherwise. The other thing is that the flow is going to be jumbled. It's not in a linear fashion. Not every customer, not every patient is going to go through in the same sequence through each of these activities. So that's going to be the difference between these two types of activities, these two types of processes rather. So what are the implications of a decision of process choice, whether you've picked, let's say, a jumbled process or whether you've picked a linear kind of a process? Let's take each one of these and talk through the implications of them. So cost. Obviously, when you have a dedicated set of activities for different types of customers, the upfront cost is going to be very high, right? You have to invest separately for a process for the kids as patients as well as for the adults as patients. So there are going to be two parallel processes. You have two wait areas, you have two radiology departments, two pharmacies, and so on and so forth. So the upfront cost is going to be high. Now, what you have to think about is over a long period of time, if you have enough volume of each of these different types of customers, your cost per customer, your cost per patient in this case, might be lower. So if you're going for that kind of an advantage based on volume, and there is enough volume of each type of patient, of each type of customer, then it may make sense for you to make that upfront investment into two different types of processes, two different arrangements for that are dedicated for each of those two customers, right? So that would be the cost benefit analysis that you would have to do when you were looking at should we go in for a linear arrangement or should we go in for a jumbled arrangement? Because if you were to do a jumbled arrangement, you could share the activities. However, it might get expensive from the point of view of the customer. They have to adjust to not having a dedicated playroom as the wait area or a dedicated TV room as the wait area for adults. And that's a cost that the customers sort of have to face. And so you have to think of the implications of that. Well, let's take the second element of speed. So if you recognize what we're going through here are things that customers care about, things that organizations care about. We care about the cost of producing something, the cost of providing something to a customer. We also care about the speed at which we are able to deliver something to a customer. And the customer also cares about that, obviously. So in terms of speed, if you have a linear arrangement, if it's in a straight line, the obvious implication is that it's going to go much quicker than it would if it was in a jumbled kind of flow. So the speed is going to be higher if it is in a linear arrangement, and jumbled it's going to be more messy. What's also going to happen is that there will be some scheduling issues getting into the picture here, because you'll have some adults that take longer for certain tasks, and kids might take longer for some other tasks. And that's going to mess up the way that you have each of the patients going through. And if they're in mixed sequence, you're going to have issues of there being more waiting. So the speed is going to get affected. Now let's take a look at the next one, flexibility. In a linear arrangement, you have less flexibility of being able to cater to different types of customers, cater to different types of patients in this case. And that's by design, right? We've arranged the process for more efficiency. We've arranged the process for more speed. When it's a linear arrangement, you're sacrificing flexibility in that case, whereas in a jumbled flow, there's going to be more flexibility. If there are different needs of customers, they can be tackled in a different sequence through the jumbled flow, and that's going to work fine. Quality, the next aspect that customers care about, that organizations care about. Now, quality, from a very broad perspective, if you were to take a look at it, the linear one is going to be focusing on speed, but might be sacrificing quality in one way if everybody is being treated like widgets going through an assembly line. On the other hand, if you're thinking about there being specialists that are dealing with each type of patient, so you have people who are doctors and nurses who are trained not only to deal with the ailments of kids, but also deal with the way the different kids react, how they are different from adults. That's going to give better quality, a better experience to the patients. But if you think about it from a different perspective, now quality may be affected in the sense that if there is a problem that needs a broader outlook. So if there's a teenager who's going through and has gone through the kids process, they're trained to deal with kids, and they might not have some of the broader knowledge that might exist if you are going through a jumbled flow. And there are people trained in that jumbled flow to deal with different types of ailments. So having a process flow of one type, what you hopefully are seeing is that it has implications on the other operation strategy elements of how they are going to have people trained for each of the different types of processes, whether it's a jumbled flow or a linear flow. Finally, customizability. Again, the linear flow is not meant to be customizable. It's meant to be for a certain type of patient. And so customization is going to be difficult if you are going to ask for any kinds of changes within a linear flow versus when it's a jumbled flow. They are trained to be more flexible. The people are trained to be more flexible. The process is designed to be more flexible. The kind of training that people have got is more broader. So customization, they might be used to that. It might be possible for them easily. So you can see that a simple decision, or what seems like a simple decision, should it be a jumbled or a linear flow of activities, is going to have implications on what you're trying to achieve from a process, from an operation, and the customer experience, what they're able to get from an operation, from a process. Now let's take these two types of process types, we said jumbled and linear, and place them in this big arrangement of process types that we normally talk about in operations. So we think about process types on a spectrum that goes all the way from continuous to project. What you have here is a graph. On the x-axis, you have product variety going from low to high. On the y-axis, you have process flexibility going from low to high. The diagonal represents the spectrum of process choices that you can pick from for your particular operation, for your particular process. So if you think about the linear and jumbled that we just talked about, the linear is going to be the one that is second from the left. It's a line kind of process. And the jumbled is going to be the second last one, which is the job shop. So if you're going left to right, the job shop is the second last one, and that's the more jumbled flows. On the extremes, you have continuous and project. So continuous is where things are going to be even more extreme than linear, in the sense that they are going to flow on a continuous basis. And then you have the line, which is a linear. The small batch and the large batch, which is next, they represent the intermediate between the line and the job shop. So they're neither linear nor jumbled. The job shop is where you have different types of departments that are okay with dealing with different types of customers. It's not dedicated. And then finally, you have a project which is dealing with just one customer. So there, the sample size or the number of customers for which the product is being built or being catered to is one. So it's a very unique product that you're giving to a customer. Let's go through a few examples of each of these different types to get a better sense of what these different process types actually mean, what they are. So for the first one here, you have the example of a project. So this is what we talked about on the previous slide as being one unit being built for a customer at a time. Here you see an example of an airplane that is being developed. So this is in its R&D phases, and it's being developed one at a time. So this is where there are different people who are experts in different areas who are coming together to where the airplane is situated, to where the airplane is located, and they're working on it to try out different things. So it's a unit of one. It's the experts, the people who are working on this particular product are actually going to the site to where the product is being built. You can take this and think of other examples of where you would be using a project type of configuration. So for example, if you were arranging a wedding, now that's a project, right? You have a unique product that is being done for a particular set of people, and it's all the experts that are coming together. Making a movie is a project. Every movie is unique. It's a project. It needs process type of a project type, because there are going to be different experts coming together in order to get that project done. So that's one extreme of this spectrum of process types. Next one, this is what we learned earlier as being the jumble flow. So you're looking at here 6 different departments, 4 different products, and the 4 different products, the yellow, the blue, the green, and the red, have a different sequence in which they go through these 6 different departments in order to get into a finished product. So the rounds, the circles here represent raw materials. These represent the start of the job, and the squares represent the finished product, or the finished service, or the finished goods that are being delivered to customers. So here you see it's jumbled flows. This could be, again, it could be a product that's being built, the product that's being assembled, that's being manufactured, or it could be, as we saw in that earlier example, patients going through different departments in different sequence, different types of patients requiring different sequences, and some of them may even skip some departments if that is what is needed for their particular treatment. So this could be a service or a manufactured good. Next is the intermediate one, the batch one. So the best way to describe this would be, well, it's neither a job shop and nor is it an assembly line. So it's neither completely jumbled nor is it completely linear. It's somewhere in the middle. So it's a job shop that makes a single type of product at any point in time. So here you have an example of a cheese making factory. If you think of cheese making, they make it in batches. So they make a certain type of cheese. They may make it from a job shop kind of environment, and while they're making that, they don't work on anything else. They get that done, and then they move on to the other type of product. Now, you can take a job shop and convert that into a batch kind of environment, or you can think of a linear arrangement and convert that into a batch type of environment. What do we mean by that? You can have a line of an assembly line that's making different types of products, but let's say you don't have enough volume to say that we're going to dedicate this assembly line to this particular product. Then you might say, well, we'll run this assembly line for a particular kind of product for a few days, and then there's going to be a long changeover, and then we're going to run something else. So if you think of, let's say, pharmaceuticals, different types of pharmaceuticals that are being made on an assembly line, they might be being made in batches. So you don't have enough volume of a particular kind. You run a certain type of a pharmaceutical, a certain type of medication on it, and then you pause, you clean. There's going to be a thorough cleanup, a thorough scrubbing of the assembly line before you can move on to the next kind of drug or medication that you're making on that assembly line. So that's going to be a batch kind of a process for you. So it's in the middle of a linear versus a job shop. Next, we come to what we may be most familiar with, and that is this vision of cars moving down an assembly line, right? Or when you're talking about computers being assembled, people sitting next to each other and passing it on after doing whatever little task that they're doing. So it's people who are doing a little part of the whole task, and then it's being moved to the next task. So this could be, just looking at those two examples, in the case of a car, it's a machine-paced assembly line. In the case of an assembly of a computer, it might be a human-paced assembly line. I do my job in terms of whatever little task I'm supposed to do, whatever little part I'm supposed to put in for the assembly of this computer, and pass it on to the next person. I physically pass it on, and they pass it on to the next person, and so on and so forth. So that might be the way in which these things get accomplished through a manually paced assembly line or a machine-paced assembly line. So in the case of cars, it's a machine-paced assembly line. Now, as you're thinking about these different types of configurations, you can think about the car being made from a different type of a process configuration as well. It could be made from a job shop kind of configuration. So it's not that you are always going to make a certain product from a certain type of process configuration. There might be contexts in which you would use one or the other. And that's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. What are the advantages and disadvantages? What are the implications of choosing one process type over another? Finally, let's look at this extreme of the spectrum of process configurations. And here we're looking at a process that is generally called process industries. We call it process industries because it's a continuous process, and the products that get made in these kinds of industries are petroleum, for example. You have fertilizers that get made in plants. So what is a characteristic of this type of process? It's very automated, very highly automated. You start the petroleum plant, and it's a refinery that's making product from crude. You rarely stop it, right? You stop it maybe once in a year to do some maintenance, and it's a huge deal to have to stop it and then to restart it again. So that's what we call the continuous flow, and a lot of times it's called process industries when you're talking about these types of process types. So process industries have a continuous flow type of process. Now, we've looked at these different types of processes, so going from project to continuous flow. Let's take a look at the implications of each one of these in terms of what we care about from an operations strategy perspective. So on the left most column, you have the features of each of these different process types. So the first one is flow. Now, in a project type, so if you're thinking about making a airplane that is being made at one spot instead of on an assembly line, there's pretty much no flow. Now, if you think of a wedding that's being planned, there's no flow of activities. It's basically being done at one spot. You could be thinking of the construction of a bridge, a building. You could be thinking of an installation of a software for a particular company. So let's say you're installing ERP software for a particular company. You have to go to the site of the customer and install it. It's a project that's being done at the customer's site. There's pretty much no flow. Moving through the different process types, job shop, there's going to be jumbled flow. We saw that in some of the previous slides. And on the other extreme, you're going to have the assembly line and the continuous flow. So the assembly line is going to have some connected flow. So there may be some passing of things that is happening between different tasks, between different activities. Whereas in a continuous flow, it's going to be hard for you to even identify a discrete unit of that particular product. It's petroleum that's flowing through the pipes. It's fertilizer that's flowing through the pipes and going to the next step and getting done. And it's at the end coming out in terms of bags or tankers that are being filled up. Second aspect, flexibility. We talked about this a little bit earlier, and in terms of projects, you're going to have very high flexibility. You're going to be able to arrange that wedding for that particular customer based on different idiosyncrasies that they might have about how they want certain things to be done. And that's going to be easier for you in a project. On an assembly line, the way it's going to be designed is it's not going to be designed to be very flexible. So I'm jumping from the project all the way to the other end of the spectrum, the assembly line, to make the contrast between these two. In an assembly line, you are going to set it up for making, for example, a certain type of car. And in order to make a changeover from that one type of car to another, it's going to be difficult. It's a different matter that there are companies that are working on that, on trying to get the advantages of the assembly line and have flexibility at the same time. So that's kind of pushing the boundaries. But in general, if you were to think of an assembly line, it's going to have low flexibility. Product types, going with flexibility in case of a project, it's going to be a unique product. If you're installing ERP for a customer, you are taking care of their unique needs when you're installing that particular software for that customer. So it's going to be very unique for that customer. On the other hand, on the other end of the spectrum, if you look at the assembly line, there are going to be few product types that are going to be made from that particular assembly line. The reason you have it in the assembly line is because these are products that require very similar activities being done in exactly the same sequence and in very similar ways. In a continuous flow kind of process, the product type is going to be one product that's going to be made from one process that has been set up for that particular product. Next, expansion. If you're talking about the project type of process configuration, again, think of a wedding that is being planned, or an ERP installation, or taking care or developing a prototype for an airplane. The expansion of the activity is going to be gradual, in the sense that you can add more resources little by little, right? You can add one more person. If there's more work that needs to be done for that wedding or that software implementation, you can bring in an extra expert when you need for developing that aircraft that you're trying to develop. On the other hand, when you think of the assembly line, the other extreme of this, um, expansion for an assembly line usually happens in chunks. If an assembly line is set up to make 10,000 parts a day, going from 10,000 parts a day to 11,000 parts a day is going to be tough, right? You're not going to be able to add a little bit of capacity. The way that assembly line is going to be built, you might be able to go from 10,000 to maybe 15,000 or 20,000. So it's going to be in chunks. Similarly, if you think about a continuous flow process, an oil refinery or a company that's making fertilizer, the expansion is going to be has to be done in chunks. It's not going to be the addition of that little 2% extra that you want to get out of it. Let's take a look at the human skills that are needed for each of these different process types. So in a project, you might have people who know different aspects of the project. So you might need people with broad skills that are dealing with what the project is doing. Or you might have very specialized skills, and you might just bring them in for that particular activity and for their particular expertise that is going to have an impact on that activity, right? So if you're talking about a prototype for a plane, you bring in an expert on the equipment that is being used for navigation, and then they do their job based on their expertise, and they don't really pay attention to any of the other aspects of building the aircraft or the prototype for the aircraft. So that would be a very specialized kind of skill. Or you might need some broad project management skills for the project manager who's managing the project, who has some sense of all the activities that are needed. Once you move on beyond that, again, it becomes a set of competencies going from broad to specialized. So in a job shop, you'll need people who have broader skills. That's the advantage of a job shop, that people are able to go through different departments and get things done. They're able to fill in when there are different needs for the different departments in a process, different activities in a process. On the other hand, if you're talking about an assembly line, you might think of a person who is specialized in doing that little task. If you are familiar with, for example, the movie Modern Times in which there was Charlie Chaplin, you're talking about Charlie Chaplin working on a very specific part of that assembly line, and he's an expert in doing only that part and doesn't even know anything about what the next task is or the previous task is doing. So that would be the extreme of specialization in terms of an assembly line configuration. You have very specialized skills, and they may be very skills that do not need too much training when you're talking of an assembly line. For a continuous flow, you might have specialized skills that'll be specialized in a different sense. You might need experts who know how to assess if there's something that's going wrong with that petroleum refinery. You might need experts. So you need specialized skills, but specialized from the point of view of being very educated in a particular area. So it's less physical, more kind of intellectual skills that are being needed for a continuous flow kind of environment. Finally, volume. This should be an easy one to look at implications, because the project is built, a project type of process configuration is put in place for making one unit at a time, versus when you're talking about a assembly line or a continuous flow, these are meant to be high volume. These are meant to be making many products a minute, many products an hour. So many units of a product an hour, I should say, not many products. In fact, they're quite the other extreme. They're making one type of product in very high volumes. So an assembly line or a continuous flow is making one type of product in very high volumes. Now let's turn our attention to what all this means in terms of what types of customers are being served. So if you look at a job shop, it's catering to customers that care about high variety and are not looking for too much volume. And on the other extreme, if you're looking at a line, you're looking at customers that do not care too much about variety but want high volume. So here we can build a diagonal that says if you're on this diagonal, it's a good fit between what the product market is looking for and what the process arrangement is. And typically we think of a position off the diagonal as a bad fit. Now, what you should think about is that's a conventional way of thinking, that going off the diagonal is a bad fit. You can take a different perspective of this idea of going off the diagonal and say that what if we could use a line environment and at the same time produce high variety at a high volume and be able to give the customer what they want. So we're moving away from the diagonal in the sense of, well, it should have been a job shop from the point of view of high variety, but what if we could get both of those advantages, take that compromise away, take that trade-off away based on process configurations. So what I want you to think about is although this is a conventional way of thinking, you might want to be thinking about pushing the envelope and trying to go to that other side of making that compromise and saying, why should we have that compromise? We might be able to get some kind of cumulative capability in which we are able to offer the customer both these aspects. They can get high variety. At the same time, they can get the advantages of high volume through lower costs. So just to give you some practical examples, some examples of processes out there where they've had these different kinds of combinations. So the first example that you are seeing over here is of a specialized hospital. So this hospital is following the conventional diagonal that you saw earlier, which is it's saying that we're going to focus on high volume of a particular kind of procedure. So this is Shouldice Hospital that deals with a hernia repairs. So it deals with one kind of ailment and it focuses on a certain type of hernia repair. So it's even more specialized than looking at different types of hernia repairs. This focuses on one. The idea being that it gets the same types of patients, it has the same types of procedures that are needed, generally speaking, for all its patients, and it's able to do it very efficiently. Customers are happy, they're in and out very quickly. Patients are happy, they're in and out quickly, and they are able to achieve all of this at a low cost. So that's an example of having a process that is built exactly for what the requirements of the customers are. You can think of businesses that require different process arrangements under the same roof. So the best example for you to think about, in my opinion, would be a bakery. A bakery that makes breads, but also makes pastries and also gives sandwiches to customers. When you think of that kind of a bakery and you think of the process arrangements that they might have, if they are making their own bread and it's bread that is produced, that is demanded at high volumes, they might be making it on an assembly line, right? On a line process. May not be an assembly line, but a line process where it's dough getting in from one end of the process at the start of the process and it getting converted into bread and getting packed into polythene bags that are going to customers. So it's almost like a continuous process that we're talking about for making breads. And then you're talking about pastries that might be more of a job shop process or a batch process or a combination of those two. You might make the base for the same types of pastries from a more of a batch process, and then maybe if they are pastries that each one of them is being worked on, that might be more of a job shop process. Similarly with cakes, those are going to be from a job shop process because you have to customize them based on the message that a customer might want on the cake that they're purchasing from you. Sandwiches would also be similarly a job shop process. So what you have is under the same roof, multiple process arrangements. Now, you can also have this idea of offering high volume to a customer and at the same time customization by having a split process. So Ralph Lauren shirts, they make their shirts, they stitch their shirts to a basic shirt from a line process, from a high volume line process, and then they customize it based on monograms and the type of polo monogram that you want on it, and if you want your initials on it, those parts get customized right at the end. So it's a combination of a line and a job shop process. Another example of a company that uses two different types of processes for the same product. So this is Harley-Davidson motorcycles. Now, what Harley-Davidson does is they make motorcycles that are sold to you in the store where you can go and pick up a motorcycle, but they also make customized motorcycles. The customized motorcycles are made using a job shop kind of an arrangement. So it's one person who is dedicated to making a particular motorcycle and takes that particular motorcycle through the different departments to get the motorcycle completed, and then puts his or her signature on it as it being assembled by that particular individual. So that's your customized motorcycle from Harley-Davidson. And under the same roof, they have these standard motorcycles that are being made, that are being assembled from on an assembly line. So that's where you have the standard motorcycles that you see in the showroom. So what you see here is examples of using different types of processes based on what kind of competency the company is trying to achieve, which is based on what they are trying to offer to customers in terms of what the customers might desire in terms of how can you win their orders based on what they need. Right. Now, what I'd like you to do is take these concepts and apply them on your own. So take the idea of a fast food restaurant that you might be familiar with and a sit-down restaurant that you're familiar with. Now, you may have seen this context being used when you're talking about order winners and qualifiers, and you're talking about what do customers care about. But now we're talking about what kind of process arrangement might be needed for these two types of restaurants. One is a fast food restaurant, and one is a luxurious sit-down restaurant. So take a minute and think about the different process types that might be needed, and then think of the implications that it has for the kind of people that you would hire, for whether you would be able to get some of the production being done outside of that restaurant. So take a minute and think about that. All right. So the obvious thing that you might have thought about for a fast food restaurant is going to be some kind of assembly line, right? You're going to assemble the burgers in an assembly line, or you are going to take something that has been sent to you ready from the main supplier, and then you're just going to do the finishing touches for it. So the original product was produced in an assembly line, it was sent to the store, to the restaurant, and it was just zapped in the microwave or heated up in some way and being delivered to the customer. On the other hand, when you're thinking of a luxurious sit-down restaurant, you're thinking of the chef, the sous chef, and different types of departments within that big kitchen for that luxurious sit-down restaurant that's taking care of different aspects of the production of the food for you. So here you see the contrast between these two types of process arrangements. Now let's place these on this diagonal that we looked at earlier. And if you think about it, you're talking about the fast food restaurant having a line process. You're talking about the individual means coming from a job shop. And just for completion's sake, if you were thinking about the other types of processes, desserts in a restaurant might be made in small batches. They might be ready. You're making them and stocking them. You're not waiting for the customer's order for them. On the other extreme, on one extreme, you have wedding cakes that are being made by an artist. So they are a unique product that's being put together by a cake artist. And finally, on the bottom extreme, you're looking at a sugar refinery. So it's making a food product that's coming out of a continuous process. So hopefully what you've seen here is the spectrum that you can have different process types for the same industry. So here we're talking about the food industry and different types of process types based on what the customers desire. So in closing, you can think of process arrangements from three different perspectives, three main perspectives. One is if you're thinking about a job shop kind of environment, it's focusing more on the processes. It's focusing more on the activities within the process that are being arranged. So it's by arrangement of the activities, by arrangement of the processes. If you're thinking about a line kind of arrangement or a continuous kind of arrangement, that is focusing more on the product. You're saying each product is going to be made on a different process arrangement, and so that's more of a product focus. Second, you could be thinking from the perspective of, do we make products that are customized for customers, so they're made to order? The made to order products are typically going to come from more of a job shop kind of environment, or maybe a small batch kind of environment, because you need to customize product for whatever customer needs are. On the other hand, if it's a standard product and you can make it to stock, then you're going to use more of a linear kind of a process. So you're going to go more towards that end of the spectrum. It's going to be more linear. If you think about stages in the life cycle of products, you might start off with a new product not having enough volume to be able to justify a dedicated line for producing that product, right? So initially you might start off with a job shop kind of environment, move towards a line when you get into high volume, and then once the product matures in its life cycle and its demand starts to decline in that particular version, you might relegate it back to a job or a batch kind of environment. So that's how you can think about different process types. Other than thinking about it from what does the customer want, you can think about it in these kinds of dichotomies as well.